My name is Danny Denton. I'm the editor of The Stinging Fly, and I'm really, really lucky to be here to interview two terrific writers. It's a shame we're not doing it in a room in Cork City. There are always special nights at the Cork International Short Story Festival, but here we are, and I think it's still a brilliant opportunity to hear two brilliant writers and to hear their thoughts on their craft and all sorts of things. I will introduce them. You can see them up at the top of the screen, maybe Etgar Keret and Zsuzsi Gartner. I'll introduce them and we'll hear them read. We'll have a little chat, and then we may hear them read again towards the end. I don't think we have a chat function, but I can see a lot of familiar names. So if anybody wants to text me a question, feel free and I'll try and get to it. So the introductions. Canadian writer Zsuzsi Gartner is the author of the acclaimed story collection, All the Anxious Girls on Earth, and editor of the award-winning Darwin's Bastards, Astounding Tales from Tomorrow. Her second collection, Better Living Through Plastic Explosives, was a finalist for the Giller Prize. Her short fiction has been widely anthologized, broadcast on CBC in Canada and NPR in the US, and won numerous prizes, including 2 National Magazine Awards. Zsuzsi was the inaugural Frank O'Connor International Short Story Fellow for Cork in 2016, and she is the founder and director of Writers Adventure Camp in Whistler, British Columbia. Her new book, The Beguiling, was published by Penguin Canada in September. It is a wonderfully put together novel. It's innovative, challenging, and thrilling. But rather than saying it's postmodern or genre blurring, I prefer to say that actually I think it speaks to the more ancient or original form of the novel as an all-encompassing response to a fast-changing society and the need for different types of people to bear witness to that change. It tells the story of Lucy, whose cousin Zoltan dies in bizarre circumstances, but not before he confesses to Lucy. His confession opens up a strange avenue of events in which random people are suddenly propelled to come up and confess to Lucy as she goes about her life. She becomes a beacon for the guilty, and she likes it. In fact, she comes to crave it. And so this Canterbury kind of tales of confessions from all these people, this Russian nesting doll of secrets and stories, gathers up this kind of strange syncopated pace, offbeat yet compelling and sharply inquisitive, driving the reader way beyond where they thought they might be going. It's quite difficult actually to say more than that, because I found that reading it was a wonderful experience, and it's one of those books where you kind of, the more you talk about it, the less justice you do it. And so that journey of kind of gradual revelation, I don't really want to spoil that. But what I can say is that reading the book is a remarkable, rewarding, and very original experience. Etgar Keret was born in Ramat Gan in 1967, and his books have been published in more than 45 languages. His writing has been published in the New York Times, Le Monde, The New Yorker, The Guardian, The Paris Review, and Zoetrope. He's the author of 5 story collections, a memoir, and a number of screenplays, as well as other projects. On top of that, over 100 short movies have been based on his stories. Keret resides in Tel Aviv and lectures in Ben Gurion University in the Negev. He has received numerous prizes for his work, including the Book Publishers Association's Platinum Prize several times, the Prime Minister's Prize, the Ministry of Culture's Cinema Prize, the Jewish Quarterly Wingate Prize, the St. Petersburg Public Library's Foreign Favorite Award, the Newman Prize, the Charles Bronfman Prize, and the Sackler Prize. And that was for his latest collection, Fly Already, which has also been shortlisted as one of the best books of 2019 by the Financial Times and the New York Public Library, and is published by Granta Books. He has been hailed by The Observer as a master, and that is certainly the case. These are stories, there are about 22 of them in the latest collection, Fly Already, that are often very short, but that nonetheless have a wild range of depth, but also playfulness. They are often morally challenging, always ambitious, deft, and either very funny, brutally sad, or both at the same time. Etgar Keret is, to me, a very special writer. So welcome to you both. I don't think rounds of applause exactly work in this format, but we can imagine a virtual round of applause. Etgar, I think you're going to read first, so in your own time.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that if I'm not mistaken, The Stinging Fly was the first English written publication that had published a story of mine. The editor was Declan Mead.
I think he's here. I think I saw his name pop up.
Yeah, I was looking for his name because I think there are about 3 people in Ireland that I would want to meet, and I was hoping that he would be here. But
well, now that you're a big deal, Etgar, you can give us another story. So we'll talk about that afterwards.
Yeah, I'll happily do so. And because I was writing one of my books in the Tyrone Guthrie Institute, in Anna McCarrick in Monaghan.
Yes.
And somehow, so it was kind of like I met Declan somewhere, and he was kind enough to publish one of my stories. So it was like, more than 20 years ago, but it's a small world, as we say.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So I read a story, and it's called the Next to Last Time I Was Shot Out of a Cannon. The next to last time I was shot out of a cannon was when Odelia left with the kid. I was working as a cage cleaner for the Romanian circus, which was in town. I finished the lions' cages in half an hour, and also the bears' cages. But the elephants' cages were really a killer. My back hurt, and the whole world smelled like shit. My life was ruined, and the smell of shit fitted perfectly. I needed a break, so I grabbed myself a corner outside the cage and rolled a cigarette. I didn't even wash my hands before doing it. After a couple of drugs, I heard a small fake cough behind me. It was the circus manager. His name was Roman, and he had won the circus in a card game. The other Romanian who originally owned the circus was holding 3 queens, but Roman had 4 of a kind. He told me the story the day he hired me. Who needs luck, he said with a wink, when you know how to cheat? I was sure Roman would make a scene because I was taking a break in the middle of work, but he didn't even look angry. Tell me, he said, you want to make an easy 1,000? I nodded and he went on. I just saw Istvan, our human cannonball, in his caravan. He's completely smashed. I couldn't wake him up, and his show's supposed to start in 15 minutes. Roman's open hand drew the root of a cannonball in the air, ending with his squat fingers banging against my forehead. I give you 1,000 in cash if you take his place. I've never been shot out of a cannon, I said, and took another drag of my cigarette. Sure you have, Roman said, when your ex left you, when your son told you he hates you, when your fat cat ran away. Listen, to be a human cannonball, you don't need to be flexible or fast or strong, just lonely and miserable as hell. I'm not lonely, I protested. Really? Roman laughed. So tell me, never mind sex, when was the last time someone even smiled at you? Before the show, they dressed me in silver overalls. I asked an old clown with a giant red nose if I didn't need some instruction before they shot me. The important thing, he mumbled, is to relax your body or contract it, one or the other. I don't remember exactly. And you have to make sure the cannon is pointed straight ahead so it doesn't miss the target. And that's it, I asked. Even in the silver overalls, I still stank of elephant shit. The circus manager came over and slapped me on the back. Remember, he said, after they shoot you at the target, you get straight back to the stage, smile, and bow. And if, God forbid, something hurts, or even if you break something, you have to keep it in. You have to hide it, so the audience doesn't see. The people in the audience looked really happy. They cheered for the clowns that pushed me into the mouth of the cannon. and the second before the fuse was lit, the fat clown with the flowers that sprayed water asked me, "You sure you want to do this? It's the last chance to change your mind." I nodded, and he said, "You know that Ishtavan, the last human cannonball, is in hospital now with 10 broken ribs." "He isn't," I said. "He's just a little drunk. He's sleeping in his caravan now." "Whatever you say," the fat clown sighed and struck the match. Looking back, I have to admit that the angle of the cannon was too sharp. Instead of hitting the target, I flew upward, made a hole in the top of the tent, and continued flying to the sky way up high. I flew over the abandoned drive-in theater where Odelia and I once used to see movies. I flew over the playground where a few dog owners walked around with rustling plastic bags. Little Max was there too, playing ball, and when I flew over him, he looked up, smiled, and waved hello. On Yarkon Street, behind the place where the American Embassy keeps its dumpsters, I saw Tiger, my fat cat, trying to catch a pigeon. A few seconds later, when I landed in the water, the handful of people on the beach stood up and applauded for me. And when I came out of the water, a tall girl with a nose ring handed me a towel and smiled. When I came back to the circus, my clothes were still wet and everything was dark. The tent was empty, and in the middle of it, near the cannon I was shut out of, Roman was counting the day's take. "You've missed the target," he grumbled, "and you didn't come back to bow like we agreed. I'm deducting 400 for that." He handed me a few wrinkled bills, and when he saw I wasn't taking them, he gave me a tough East European look and said, "If I were you, I'd take it." "Forget the money, Roman," I said, and walked over to the mouth of the cannon. "Do a friend a favor and shoot me out again."
Brilliant, Etgar. Thank you very much. We'll chat about that in a minute. That's a fantastic story. Zsuzsi, would you like to read?
Thank you so much to Patrick Cotter for having me back in Cork, and for all of James's help and Danny's introduction, which was so lovely. And I just see so many faces and names I know. This is really, really exciting. I feel like I should name everybody. I'll do it later. Like I have to do some shout outs. It's too great. But I wanted to mention to Etgar that a very good friend of mine from here in Vancouver is tuned in, because you're one of her favorite writers in the entire world. So I don't see her face there, but I know she's here. Her name's Erin. So she's really excited that I'm on here with you. I'm going to read from a little later in the book, but it's actually from the third part 3, but it contains no spoilers. So Lucy has been traveling. She does all these jobs. It's sort of like Forrest Gump or Zelig, like she starts out as a journalist, but she manages to score these amazing jobs. So every chapter she has a different job. It's never explained why she's no longer in the job that she's in. So now she's touring South Australia as a wine buyer. So she's and this is set in 2024, so it's slightly near future. So I've adapted it from the book, so it kind of works better as a small thing. I stopped in Adelaide for a few days after touring the vineyards, which were recovering from the 2022 plague of starving rushes, followed by the drought of 2023. The new varietals had benefited from scorching fires in the wake of the drought, something about the alkalizing effect on acidic soils. I'd fallen in with some jolly McLaren Vale vintners who brought me along to a brunch celebrating a group of writers there for an international literary festival. This is why I decided to read it, since we're at an international literary festival, but we're not able to eat and drink and make merry and do all those things, so we're just going to make fun of one instead. The party was held in the courtyard of a mission-style home, with its peeling wrought iron filigree, empty lap pool filled with large dry leaves, its cracked pink garden walls teeming with passion fruit vines in full flower, the tapestry cushions featuring the hunters and the hunted on white wicker chairs. The space exuded a shabby chic colonial vibe. It was a convivial gathering. There was wine, of course, with one off note. All the vintners and their friends, men and women who flew hobby planes or owned small but productive mines, were climate change deniers. It started when a young novelist from Helsinki insisted on a short reading as a tribute to the host country. The passage involved a scuba diver from Finland succumbing to fathomless depression after witnessing coral death at the Great Barrier Reef. So this is the Finnish author. She afterwards swam through her days as if through brine-flavored gelatin. When her son laughed, when her husband exerted himself for her carnal pleasure, she felt no cheer. She could only picture that endless bleach-bone underwater cemetery. I'd heard the Finns were a gloomy bunch, but thought that perhaps the excerpt sounded more celebratory in its original tongue. After scattered applause and an audible snicker, one elderly winemaker groused loudly about the just vanquished Labour government's carbon tax, and soon the green baiting was fast and furious. The authors were at first silently shocked, swallowing their spicy little crayfish croquettes whole and exaggeratedly eyeballing each other in a kind of telepathic circling of the wagons. But then this elegant elderly author from Rapport, his lovely white hair swirled up like a meringue run through with nicotine streaks. Above his kind face, cleared his throat. May I be so bold to be sure we can agree that due to the accumulation of unprecedented carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, we should all to a person be scrutinizing our transportation options. As if he and the rest of the gleefully globe-trotting writers hadn't flown up there, racking up air miles and carbon emissions. Well, there's the pot calling a kettle black, mate, said the man to my left, the heir to the Ugg boots family fortune. I was in Delhi last year and had to sport an oxygen mask the whole fucking time. One of the tortoise-skinned women in sleeveless pastel-hued linen tunics rotated her neck to the right, then the left, raised her eyebrow and laughed. Oh, surely you don't buy that silly Greta Thunberg sky is falling nonsense. They all had the same look, that George Hamilton tan, skin no doubt that recoiled from even an SPF 5. During the Renaissance, they would have been considered field hands or Moors. Here, they were what passed for landed gentry. You would think, said another tortoise, when she was appointed Deputy Secretary General of the UN, she would have cut off those braids. That girl needs a stylist. The Finnish novelist regained her voice. It's not a joke. The polar bears are fish in a barrel on their melting ice floes. A transplanted Texan who'd been introduced as running the biggest horseback adventure outfit in Queensland. Outside of Queensland, nyucked and straightened one arm into a rifle while peering through the scope of a thumb and index finger. That I'd love to bear witness to, darling. That was when the lone Australian writer present, winner of several honours for his trilogy about the horrors of a long-forgotten Gallipoli, slurred loudly for more ice. If it was a diversion tactic, it did not work. The Canadian poet Kay, famous at home and in Germany for odes to Prairie truck stops, said, seriously, people, the glaciers are losing ground daily from Canada to Peru to the Antarctic. I know a guy with National Geographic magazine who says that in geological time, it's like standing and watching the Eiffel Tower melt. Our hostess, whose leek and potato frittata was exceptional, and who'd commandeered her handsome twin sons into making killer bellinis, laughed. Antarctica's actually gaining ice. Senator Mickey Rourke was here last week and told me. One of the linen tunic women interrupted. Isn't it crazy how much the senator looks like Lin-Manuel Miranda in the Nautilus? Right down to that crumpled yachting hat, only less, tan, of course. The gentleman from Rapport gasped and coughed into an umber handkerchief. Oh, that television program, it will prove the end of me. When Captain Nemo's pregnant wife contracted Zika virus, my tears flowed like Kunchikal Falls. My dearest told me to stop that right now and be a man or she was packing to go to her sister in Brighton. This was apparently the cue for the Christicat, I made this up, this country, now I can't pronounce it, Kyrgyzstan conflict vet from Lexington, whose memoir about blood and belonging in the heat-soaked desert was an unexpected New York Times bestseller, to launch into a sad spiel about the so-called third golden age of television, and really about when, and how he was wasting his talents trying to write the great American novel when all people really wanted was to binge watch plague porn, written before the plague, on Netflix, Infinity, and Disney Plus. I felt sorry for him, I really did. That handsome face pocked with those PTSD scarred eyes, the perceptible tremor of his right hand that he attempted to quell by keeping it pressed against the table. I hadn't spent much time among writers and found the level of palpable neediness and ego astounding. Also, they'd all quickly cleared their plates and gone for seconds and even thirds, as if they hadn't been fed since they were weaned from the tit. The scrawny Adelaide socialites gripped their glasses of sparkling water with hands knuckle whitened to bone. Evidently, the sight of all those fat cells invisibly but imperceptibly multiplying like a vast contagion was more frightening than the prospect of the rising seas, the droughts ravaging the plains, the fires scarring the landscape, decimating the wildlife and their ranks of firefighters. Like their fellow South Australians in Neville Shute's apocalyptic classic On the Beach, they partied by the shore as end times drifted closer.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Zsuzsi. Well, there's an interesting place to start there. So this novel of yours takes us all over the place. It takes us all over Canada, obviously. It takes us to Ireland. It takes us to Australia, many other places. And in kind of a really interesting form in terms of we're following essentially one character, but we're engaging with many. And I'm just really curious to know how that developed from like how that first came to you and how that structure might have grown in your work on the novel.
Well, this might be a good time to address what the heck I'm doing at a short story festival with a novel. This is because, I think I am primarily a short story writer. I've done that all my life. This is my first novel. Ever. And the confessions in the book are, I call them embedded stories. And some can stand alone, some not so well, but I call them embedded stories, sort of like, so it's not linked stories. It's a novel and there's these embedded stories, which are these confessions. And it's like, the embedded journalist during a war. So there's a certain, functions sort of there, but they're inside and outside the main thing. The reason for the international aspect of it is just, these were all except for Helsinki, where I've never been, all the places that appear where someone confesses, like, are all places I have spent time, although the section, the chapters in Germany is in 1969 in Stuttgart, where I have been there and I have family in Germany, although I was a small child, like I wouldn't have been there at that time. So I don't know, it came together, this international aspect of it just seemed to fit into the bigger picture things I wanted to say. I wanted to extend it beyond Canada and the concerns people here might have and things like that. And in some cases, my character's actually in the other locations where people confess to her, but in most cases, their stories are told about those places, but she encounters them pretty much in Vancouver. I don't know if that answers your question, but I did want to address why I'm at a short story festival. So,
and as part of that, like, it's not just like I mentioned the Canterbury Tales in the intro, and I'm not the first person to bring it up, I don't think, but there's a sense of stories that you call them embedded stories. They're accumulated, and they all revolve around Lucy, and she's kind of she's like a shrine in the novel for these confessions. But I just wondered about how tricky was it, and I guess I'm asking as a kind of a jealous writer, how tricky was it to weave those in and out of her, because she goes on a journey of kind of development. And again, I don't want to say too much because it might spoil the experience somewhat for people, but she develops massively as a character through the novel. And how tricky was it to weave that in and out, and how much work did it take, or did it kind of come as we read it in one sequence?
Years, baby. This took me 8 years. Very tricky. Okay. Very tricky. And I don't write chronologically either. So I would be completing, in fact, and it went through, to give you an example, there's a lot of writers in the audience, so they might find this interesting. So I spent, after the novel was accepted and I got my notes from my editor, which were, just a substantive conversation about things, I spent almost 7, 8 months full time doing the first big revision, and the second one took about 3. So there was a year of revising, 1 massive revision, 1 kind of big after. There are 13 chapters, and And then there's interstitial bits too. There's parts that aren't part of a chapter. There are these weird lists and linking things and stuff like that. But the 13 chapters, which were modeled on the 13 books of St. Augustine's The Confessions, which is what I was kind of going for there. Canterbury Tales was kind of a comparative I used as well, and Scheherazade as well. So in the next after that massive revision, only 5 of the 13 chapters were in their original place in the book.
Wow. Okay, so that's a big shifting.
Yes, and then just keeping all the balls in the air and then having to comb through, and then so many things moved to the point where my husband was reading the book. I wanted him to wait till it was actually out. It only came out exactly 2 weeks ago today. That was the pub date. It wasn't even around in the stores till a few days later. But I had my copy, so he starts reading, and I said, what part are you on? And he said, how could you be there already? That's way later in the book. And he goes, no, look, it's right here. And I'm like, I didn't even realize that had moved up in the first part. I thought it was near the end. So it was insanely tricky. That's all I'll say. Very, very tricky.
It's a triumph. So congratulations. Etgar, can we talk about the man getting shot out of the cannonball? That was one of the standout stories for me in the collection for a number of reasons. But the one thing I want to ask is, why do you think he wants to get back in the cannonball? Is it because he saw all these people cheering him on? Is it the release?
Well, I think that this guy, he experienced his life as the games that he had lost. He doesn't have anything. And being shot out of a cannon and flying in the air, he can see them from a different kind of vantage point. His kid who doesn't communicate with him, suddenly smiles at him. He sees his ex-wife from a safe distance so they don't have a fight. He's high enough to find his cat who got lost. So for me, this story is very much a metaphor about writing. Because I think in a sense that when you write, you are still present in your life, but you see your life as an outsider, insider. You are both in it, but you can also be reflexive and maybe more judgmental of things and maybe less subdued by your anxiety or by other emotions. And I think that's what make writing and being shut out of cannons kind of addictive, because I think that when you write very, very much like the human cannonball, you're scared, or before you're doing it, you don't know if you'll be able to pull it off. You don't know if you pay a price for it. Maybe, I think in every story there is a shame and confession in it. You don't know if people will accept it. So it's all about this kind of anxiety. But when the story is being written, you really feel like weightless and in the air, and with all those insights that you never had when you were in a different angle.
Yeah, marvelous. And in terms of being a writer and shooting yourself out of a cannon, how often do you know where you're going to land? Because one thing I've noted about your stories and particularly enjoy is you often think you're going somewhere. And actually, this is true of your novel as well, Zsuzsi. You often think you're going somewhere, but where you end up as a reader is not where you expected to go. And I'm just wondering, do you plan a lot your stories, Etgar, or do you shoot yourself out of a cannon and see what you see?
No, I think for me, I would say that, when I write a story, I try to know about the story as little as they can. And the ultimate kind of downer is to think of a story that you think about its end, how it's going to end. Because I think that, when you write short fiction, at least the style in which I write, for me, it's like you can have two options. You can retell an adventure. For example, figure out a story saying, okay, this guy will get married, the guy die, and they're going to bury him. And that would mean that you're retelling a story that you know, or kind of live the adventure. Kind of you throw your character into a situation and you don't really know what's going to happen, and you let the story kind of lead you. And that makes it fascinating, because I think that I write my stories very much like a reader. Only I know that if I won't write the next paragraph, I will never know what's going to happen. But the excitement is that of somebody who's really kind of picked up a story and really want to figure out where this thing is heading.
Yeah, marvelous. And I wanted to ask you, there's another thing in that story that I think joins the two of you, maybe as kind of on perspectives in writing. There really interesting stuff happens with parenthood in both of your books. And I'm probably thinking this as a dad, like a recent enough dad as well. In this story, he sees his son, who I think one of the other guys says, "Oh, your son doesn't like you," or whatever. And in the Beguiling, of course, Lucy has kind of she's left her child with the child's father, and she has either problems with motherhood or parenthood. And I just wondered whether that was something that you were aware of when you were writing. You were trying to write, because it appears in a couple of stories, Etgar, and thinking of To the Moon and Back as well. Parents trying but failing, or trying and having mixed results. Is parenthood something you guys, when you were writing, it was there and you were trying to write it in, or is it something that you looked at it afterwards and said, "Oh, I didn't realize," like maybe a perspective that the guy has from the cannonball, where he kind of starts to see where things are?
Well, I won't say that. I think all my life I wrote stories about parent-child relationship. You know, I think in all my story collections there are at least a couple of stories in each collection about parent and child relationship. But the interesting thing was that I would always write them from the child perspective. And only the moment that I became a parent, I started writing kind of the same stories from the parent perspective. And I think that usually the things that I write about are the things that I'm closest to. And many times when I write about my anxieties. So, for example, I have quite a few stories in my collection about people who are either divorced or widowers, or basically falling out of a relationship. And I'm with the same woman for almost 25 years, you know, happily married. And she says to me, "Why do you write all those stories?" And I say, "I write about my anxieties, you know." It's funny. It's like all my life I wrote stories about people who lose their parents, you know. And a year ago I lost my mother, and almost 10 years ago I lost my father. And I must say that I felt that all my writing, you know, in the 20 years that had preceded that, kind of prepared me for something, or at least kind of let me take some kind of an obscure fear that is overwhelming and make a shape out of it. It's like in the horror movies, it's always scariest before you see the bad guy. You know, always in the third part when he runs and breathes heavily and he kind of waves the knife, you say, okay, it's just this guy, you know. But when you just hear sounds and squeaks and see a shadow moving, it's much scarier. So I think that one of the functions of storytelling for me is to take those kind of most fearful corners in my life, you know, and basically write a story and put them in the light. And because the family is such an important thing in my life, I write a lot of stories about families that go wrong.
And fascinating. I think the American writer Ben Marcus, there's a similar thing going on there. That's really interesting. Zsuzsi, is that the case with you? Have you written out of that kind of anxiety, or is it a different approach?
Oh yeah, anxiety is my middle name. I think I write out of anxiety, fear, and anger. I guess those are like the holy trinity of motivating factors. I would say for sure. Yeah.
Okay, then let's talk anxiety and fear. We're living in a very, very strange time. And Etgar, you rightly said while we were in the virtual green room, it's interesting to talk about the elephant in the room. And we're living in a time, there's lots of stuff going on politically all over the world, but we're also living through COVID-19. And I just thought it would be interesting to ask you about how it has impacted your work mainly to start with, and then maybe we might talk about it wider. But have you, I have lots of friends who are writers that they found it either very difficult to write or very difficult to read, or they found it extremely productive for various reasons. How have you been finding it? Zsuzsi, maybe you can start.
Well, most of my writer friends have been finding it incredibly distracting and difficult for various reasons, whether they're just overwhelmed with anxiety or just everything's too weird, or they're dealing with small children, or for me, I was basically doing when COVID hit, so the pandemic hit, I was in the midst of going through the copy edit and then submitting and answering. I was going through the production process of the book, so there wouldn't have been the focus or time to write anyway. And now, after the book's just come out, and there's been all these things going on, and I'm quite anxious to get back to the writing. But I have an anxiety disorder, like an actual one you have to take pills for, that I've been on for 10 years. So the at the outset of the COVID thing, if I hadn't had the book production to focus on, I probably wouldn't have crawled out of bed. Like, I was really frightened. I was like, my hand washing normally is like people are being asked to do now. That's my normal hand washing. So my hand washing became like skin's hanging off, like I look like a walking leper. It's like, no, not again. I touched the doorknob. Oh my God. I'm making it sound funny, but it was really, really horrifying. And I was in a state of heart almost leaping out of my chest for about 6 weeks, and went shopping once every 2 weeks and came home and then didn't want to leave the house again. So now it's kind of settled, because even though things are getting worse now at where I live, it's worse than it was in the spring here because of the young people. There's so much more information that I'm not freaking out, and I just want to get back to my desk.
Yeah,
so
yeah. And where is it?
But a lot of friends. Yeah.
Where is your desk? Sorry, is your desk in an office or at home, or?
Yeah, it's in half the garage is my office. Okay, yeah. So it's a garage. I walk through the little backyard, little courtyard, and sit there and go into my office. This little place that's a complete mess now, which is why I'm doing this thing in the bedroom, because it looks like a hurricane hit. I can't even go wade through. I haven't even done my taxes. I'm glad this isn't. No one from Revenue Canada is watching. Anyway, I've just been, it's a very distracting time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something, probably the thing that my experience of it has been, I've had anxiety, but not great anxiety, but being constantly distracted by it, I found probably is the worst thing for me, which I guess makes me quite lucky. And what about with the book coming out? Are bookshops open in Vancouver? Are people able to access it? Are you getting to promote it, do it kind of the justice it deserves?
Across Canada, there's the different provinces have different stages, but during the summer, everything opened up. Before that, we're very blessed here in Vancouver. We have almost, I would say, like at least a dozen independent bookstores, and a lot of them were delivering or doing curbside delivery all summer, which was great. Same in Toronto and Montreal, like when they reopened, even when they closed down, they were doing the curbside. And then all the stores are open now. So the big bookstores are open. Bookstores are all open. There's no in-person events. It's all like this. So you can't have, you can't. It's kind of weird, because last book I had come out, I had almost 200 people in a warehouse party, and now it's like I sit in my bedroom and talk to people. So there's worse things in the world than not being able to get drunk at your own book launch. So it's a small disappointment.
But I'm pining for a party myself, to be honest. Etgar, how is your work process? How have you been affected by it, or how has it worked for you?
Well, I must say that, I began writing when I was 19 during my compulsory army service. And when I served in the army, I wrote a lot. And after I got out of the army, I kept writing, but not as much. And I would say that since the first lockdown, because here in Israel we have a second lockdown, but since the first lockdown, I think it was the most prolific time in my life as a writer, as a citizen, not as a soldier, And I think that it's not a coincidence that it's in those two tough times, that I write more, because if my mechanism, we talked about the things that get us writing. So I would say it's a anxiety, yearning, and boredom. And during lockdown and COVID, you have a lot of anxiety, a lot of boredom, and a lot of yearning. So it's a good time to write. I also think that, let's say, as a writer, I always make kind of a dichotomy, or I don't know, two opposition for me are authenticity and the force of inertia. I think many times when we write stories, we try to break the force of inertia. It's like you go and you always buy coffee from a guy, but once you ask him, what's your name? And then you realize that he's a refugee, and that because he was gay, he was and then suddenly like something changed, but you could have bought the coffee 100 times without asking for his name. And I think that what happened with COVID is as if we were going on this fast riding train and it got derailed, and the first thing that happened when you get derailed, the force of inertia is broken. So I think most people, writers and people who do not write, 90% of what they do in their life is not authentic. They get up in the morning, they put their kid in school, they buy something in the supermarket, they go and visit the sick aunt, they do all those kind of things. They never choose. They don't get up and say, I know what I'm going to do today. Today I'm going to go to work. No. I got an idea. I'm going to drop my child at school first. We just do it without thinking. And I think there is something in this kind of, this full stop, these people kind of getting up and saying, okay, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do with my life? Okay, I'm going to watch YouTube and make a crepe Suzette, No, I'm going to do 500 push-ups. I'm going to have like squares in my tummy. All those kind of things, they remind me a lot of the writing process, because when you write very short stories, you say, okay, what am I going to do today? I'm going to be human cannonball. Yeah, somebody's going to shoot me. And so there is something about the entire kind of situation. It's difficult for me to differentiate between the word and what's going in my head. It's as if like, in the first lockdown, I said to a good friend of mine, he was complaining, and I said to him, you know what? Now you know how I've been living all my life. Getting up in the morning, not getting out, not speaking to anybody, sitting in a room, trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do today. This is what I've been doing for the past 30 years.
Yeah. And I have a lot of friends who aren't writers, and they were kind of saying, well, how has it been for you? How has it been for you? And I was like, well, more or less exactly the same. Because I write right at the end of the bed, and that's how I do my job. Yeah.
You have a baby now,
Well, yeah.
COVID is obscure. Baby is very concrete, Well,
we've been on lockdown, since he was born, more or less. And it sounds like, do you think it's going to change massively then the control people take on their lives in the future? And I'm not talking about writing in general. Can you see a shift of kind of willpower or something coming based on this period of like enforced reflection or enforced control?
Well, I it's funny because I took a part in a wonderful project. It was called the Decameron Project in the New York Times, where they asked, I think, about 30 different writers to write stories about the COVID-19 and its period. And what I recognized was so many writers wrote beautifully some narratives that I recognized as something that is both nostalgic and full of victimhood. Kind of saying, in a sense, we had a beautiful word, and now it's down. It went down the drain. It will never return. We will never hug people. We will never kiss them. And for me, maybe because I'm a son of two Holocaust survivors who refuse to see themselves as victims, I don't like a victim story, because in a victim story you don't have choice and you don't have responsibility. And I want to offer let's say, I think COVID-19 is difficult, but it's also an opportunity And our perspective about it shouldn't be so kind of, oh my God, you know, what happened to human beings? Because, for example, I can tell you about myself. You know, when I'm asthmatic, I'm very, very much scared of getting COVID, and I'm very super careful. And when it started, I said to people, look, I'm not going to shake your hand. I'm not going to hug you. And it happened to me a few times that I meet people and they want to hug me and I say, sorry, I'm sorry, Greg, please, it's COVID time, please stay away. But I find myself that when I meet my brother and my best friend, I always hug them. And what I thought to myself is that, no, it's not that now with COVID hugging is impossible, but it comes with a price tag. And then when I think about it again, I think about all the fake hugs I gave to people during the years. All the hugs that I gave just because they were giveaways, you know, I didn't have to pay for them. And now suddenly I have a system where, no, I'm not in a world who's hugless. I'm in a world where hugs really count. When you give something out. So I'm saying that, you know, as storytellers or as readers, I think that we have this kind of freedom, you know, to construct a story in which we are protagonist, and we make choices as we go along with the story. And I think that, for example, COVID-19 is like this big Rorschach stain that, let's say, if I'm troubled by the global warming, then I would say, listen, guys, you know, for the past years, we haven't been flying as much and everything works, you know, here we're zooming now. I don't have to come to Cork, you know, as I did in the past a couple of times, you know, I can stay home and it still works and you know, it's good. But at the same time, in Israel, for example, the Secret Service are tracking mobile phones so they can see that if somebody's ill, they can know who was next to him, you know? And some people say, you know, why not keep it after COVID is gone? You know, it's been working so brilliantly well, you know? So I'm saying you can take the same reality and say, how about we'll get better? Or how about we'll get worse? Or if I don't want to be judgmental, how about we'll have a stronger regime? Or how about we will not kill the planet we're staying on? So I think that there is something in this kind of energy that we can take it to places that will mostly tell us who we are and what we want, you know. And reality is just collateral damage, you know, in our track that way. And I was disappointed in many cases of how kind of timid and passive people instantly get, you know. It's like, you know, I would expect more struggle, you know. My wife and son are just now in a demonstration. And you know, in a demonstration that, you know, if policemen drag you, you know, you should go like flail your hands and shout a little bit, you know. You don't take a nap. And I think that, you know, that what my best suggestion for everybody who goes through this period, try to think, what can I get out of it? You know, what can I learn out of it? Because we're going to go through it anyway, so why go down line?
Yeah, we might as well learn something. And yeah, absolutely, fantastic. I'm looking at the clock and time has disappeared on us. We would love to have two more readings. Zsuzsi, would you like to give us another reading?
Yeah. Okay. So I am going to read a short excerpt that takes place in Cork because I thought that would be fun for people. Fantastic. So let me just set it up. So in this isn't the part I read before. It was Lucy speaking, the protagonist. This is doesn't give anything away, but it's just a small part in a confession by a woman she runs into in Vancouver called Liv, who spent some time in Cork and became completely besotted by these Lithuanian twins that are referred to as B and B. And they're these they're working, they're computer, you know, aficionados. They're there to work at Holly Hill. And so I'm just going to jump into the Liv part, but the twins pop up. So she comes across She already knows them. She's already besotted with them when this little bit begins. So Liv had gone to Ireland to study the history of world religions at University College Cork, her attempt to make sense of the unraveling human experiment across the planet. But she didn't have the required patience for the sacred texts. She was drawn instead to accounts of the carnage and collateral damage of distant centuries, bloodied histories which put the world's current troubles into, if not exactly perspective, sharper kind of relief, which speaks to, I guess, this whole pandemic situation that we find ourselves in as well. Liv had gone to, by the time she encountered the twins, her spiritual and academic pursuits had dwindled to walking the labyrinth behind St. Finbarr's. The narrow, spiraling path carved into the lawn in the shadow of the cathedral offered a few minutes of walking prayer or secular contemplation. It was nothing like the twisted lair where Theseus stalked his horned half-man. The labyrinth, with a single way in and back out, is quite unlike a maze with its many false turns and heart-stopping dead ends. It was summer when Liv first walked the labyrinth, slowly, with head bowed, as if waiting for a scene to split the earth and deliver up a miracle. The gravel crunched softly as she shed her delusions of scholarship, her visions of guiding weeping pilgrims through the devastation of the ziggurat of Nimrod to release palm doves skyward. By mid-autumn, dry aspen leaves would fill the path, whispering underfoot as if the dead shuffled along in her wake in loose slippers. The sky would darken early, the wrought iron gates locked long before the supper hour. Sucre would become 2 or 3 Jamesons at the Abbey Tavern. Some of you remember our times at the Abbey Tavern? Okay. Before the trudge home along the North Main and the rise across the rising river. Well before those dreary foreshortened days would arrive, though, Liv was headed up Cornmarket one evening to the guest house in the historic quarter when she spotted her new friends B&B leaning out over the Shandon Bridge. The twins gazed down on the River Lee, deep in thought. This was in mid-September, the tail end of a lovely Indian summer day. Beside them on the pedestrian bridge, the 2 Jehovah's Witnesses competed with the Roma panhandler for the attentions of the passers-by. Liv admired their chutzpah and persistence of will in what was still a Catholic country. But the JWs had better posture and better teeth and a portable display stand for their inspirational magazines, so she always turned her back to them and gave her change to the Roma woman, swaddled in several layers of mildewed clothing. Her palm looked like a chicken's foot, and she never smiled. When she reached them, the nearest bee commented, "It is excellent fishing in streaming waters." "I wouldn't eat the fish caught in there," Liv said. "No, like Simon and Garfunkel," said the other bee. "When troubled water comes, inspiration strikes." "I don't think that's what the song means," Liv said. "In Lithuanian means this. Like Piano Man," they jump in and interrupt each other. So there's the 2 bees are talking here. "Like Piano Man means do laundry today, not tomorrow. Tomorrow comes rain. Yes, like life insurance policy. Like busy ants, not stupid lazy grasshopper." The twins were only in their mid-20s, but sometimes displayed the moral certitude of an elderly great aunt quoting Aesop or Benedict XVI. They also had a weakness for American pop songs of the early to mid-70s. "Billy Joel," one bee said. "Billy Joel," the other bee agreed. As the sun dipped behind the former madhouse on the hill above Sunday's Well, and the golden afterglow left the river, B&B launched into the chorus from Only the Good Die Young. The older of the 2 Jehovah's Witness women began to hum along, slapping a watchtower against her thigh like a tambourine, while the Roma beggar clapped her chicken hand feet to the beat. Liv would not have been surprised if all the residents of Shandon had come out of their houses and started to dance. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Zsuzsi. A lovely ode to Cork.
I hope I got Cork right there.
Oh yeah. I'll be looking out for B&B tomorrow when I'm walking around town. And I love the interpretation of Piano Man as well. Thank you very much. Etgar, will you see us out with a reading?
So the story is called The Evolution of a Breakup. At first we were a cell, then an amoeba, then a fish. And after a very long and frustrating era, we became a lizard. That was the era when, as we recall, the earth felt soft and unsteady beneath our feet. So we climbed a tree. Up there in the treetops, we felt secure. At some point, we climbed down and started walking upright and speaking. And as soon as we began speaking, we just couldn't stop. After that, we watched a lot of TV. It was a fantastic era. We always laughed in the wrong places, and people stared and said, "What's so funny?" And we didn't even bother answering. That's how little we cared. We promised ourselves we'd find a job we'd love. And when that didn't work out, we settled for a job we didn't hate. And we felt lucky, and then unlucky, and then lucky again. And suddenly our parents were dying. Then they died. A second before they departed, we held their hands really tight and told them we forgave them for everything. And our voices broke when we said that, because we weren't convinced we were telling the truth and we were afraid they could sense it. Less than a year after that, our son was born, and he also climbed the tree and felt secure up there. And he came down at some point too and went off to college. Then we were left alone, and it started getting cold. Not like it was at other times eons ago when we hid in burrows and peeled out while the dinosaur froze to death, but still cold. And we went to an acting class because our friend said it would be good for us. They gave us a series of improv exercises, and in the first one we poisoned each other. In the second, we cheated on each other. And in the third, the instructor, who spoke English with a heavy, indistinct accent, said, "Now switch partners." And within a second, it wasn't us anymore. It was just me. The new woman who was my partner said, "Let's do a sketch where you're a baby and I give birth to you and nurse you and protect you from all evil." And I said, "Sure, why not?" But by the time she'd finished giving birth to me and nursing me and protecting me from all evil, our time was up. And the instructor with the strange accent asked if the exercise had brought back any primal memories. And I said it hadn't, because I didn't want to admit that it had brought back ancient memories from millions of years ago, from before we even emerged from the water. Afterward, at home, we got into an argument over something really dumb and had the biggest fight we'd ever had since we were created. We yelled and cried and broke things, the kind of things that if you'd asked us a day earlier, we would have told you were unbreakable. Then we picked up our stuff in a suitcase and shoved whatever didn't fit in the suitcase into a plastic grocery bags. And we dragged all that behind us like homeless people to the apartment where a very wealthy friend of ours lived. And he put a sheet out on his posh sofa for us. The friend told us that it might seem like the end of the world now, but by morning, all the rage and hurt feelings would melt away and everything would look different. And we said no. Something had been broken. Something had been torn apart. Something we would never be able to mend or forgive. The friend lit a cigarette and said, "Okay, maybe so, but can I just ask, why are you always talking in the plural?" Instead of answering, I just looked around and realized I was alone. I mean, completely alone.
Marvelous, Etgar. Thank you very much. Listen, thank you both so much. I think we probably could have talked for 2 hours. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. It was lovely to see the various names and faces.
Thank you. That was so much fun.